Sunlight cut through the dusty windows of Garson's general store as 12-year-old Gray Calloway finally spoke the words. His bruised face told only half the story, but his whisper filled the room completely. "My father beat me all my life." The townspeople shifted uncomfortably, eyes down, each one finding sudden interest in the wooden floorboards, all except one man. Standing in the corner, the Apache known only as Grey Wolf stepped forward, his weathered face carrying decades of pain and wisdom. No one expected him to speak, this outsider they barely tolerated, but when he knelt before the boy, the simple words he offered changed everything forever. Could an outcast truly become the father a broken boy deserved? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Redemption Creek stood as if painted against the Arizona mountains, a collection of weathered buildings that had seen their fair share of dreams crumble to dust. The town had been founded by men seeking second chances, but like many such places, it had settled into rigid certainties about who belonged where. The old oak at the edge of town, locally known as the Hanging Tree, had witnessed the town's darkest judgments. No one had been hanged there for nearly a decade, but its branches still cast long shadows across the community's conscience. Sheriff Thomas Miller wiped dust from his badge as he completed his morning rounds. At 53, the silver-haired lawman carried himself with the practiced calm of someone who had seen enough trouble to know when more was brewing. His eyes lingered on Garson's general store, where yesterday's commotion still hung in the air like storm clouds. "Morning, Sheriff," Elmer Whitfield called from his barber's chair. "Heard about the Calloway boy?" Miller nodded without stopping. Everyone had heard, and everyone was talking in whispers. Cyrus Calloway owned the largest cattle operation in the territory. His Broken Spur Ranch employed half the men in the county and had first claim on the water rights that kept the other farms alive during drought years. His donation had built the church. His money had brought in the school teacher. His influence had secured the railway spur that kept Redemption Creek from becoming another ghost town, and now his son had spoken aloud what many had suspected for years. Miller paused at the hitching post outside his office, running a weathered hand across his mustache. He'd seen the bruises on Gray's thin arms last summer, had noticed how the boy flinched at sudden movements, had even, God help him, heard the cries once when riding past the Calloway place after dark. He'd done nothing. "Just family business," Cyrus had explained once, when Miller dared inquire. "Boy needs discipline, you understand." And Miller had understood all too well. His own father's belt had taught him plenty about discipline. Across the street, Martha Henson emerged from the boarding house. After 20 years as cook at the Broken Spur, her sudden appearance in town spoke volumes. Her grey hair was pulled tight in its usual bun, but her eyes darted nervously as she carried a small carpet bag toward the stagecoach office. On the far side of Main Street, several townspeople gave wide berth to the solitary figure examining dried herbs at the apothecary's outdoor display. Even from a distance, Grey Wolf's presence commanded attention. The Apache moved with the quiet precision of a man accustomed to being watched. His dark hair, streaked with silver, hung in 2 long braids. The scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw told its own story of survival. The town tolerated Grey Wolf because his remedies worked when Dr. Parker's often didn't. Mothers would slip away to his cabin when their children's fevers wouldn't break. Men with backs broken by years of labor found relief in his poultices, but they never invited him to their tables, never met his eyes for longer than necessary. Now he had stepped into the center of a storm by helping the Calloway boy. Miller entered his office just as the telegraph clicked to life. The message was brief but clear. Cyrus Calloway was riding into town with 6 of his ranch hands. He was coming for his son. The sheriff poured himself a shot of whiskey, knowing he would need it. Outside his window, he watched as Mrs. Garson hurried her children indoors. The blacksmith doused his forge. The saloon girls, usually not seen before noon, peered anxiously from upstairs windows. Redemption Creek was battening down for a storm that had been brewing for 12 long years. Dawn at the Broken Spur Ranch always carried a moment of peace before Cyrus Calloway's boots hit the floorboards. Gray treasured these quiet minutes, whittling away at a small wooden horse he'd been crafting for nearly a year. His hands moved with surprising skill for a 12-year-old, coaxing life from the cedar chunk. The carving was his secret, one of many, The half-finished horse stood frozen in mid-gallop, awaiting legs that Gray hadn't yet found time to complete. Like everything beautiful in his life, it remained unfinished, interrupted. "You've got your mother's hands," Martha had told him once, watching him work. Same delicate touch. She'd quickly looked away, aware she'd ventured into forbidden territory. No one spoke of Catherine Calloway anymore. Gray kept his mother alive through small rituals. Each morning, he'd touch the silver locket hidden beneath his shirt, containing a tiny portrait and a lock of auburn hair. He'd whisper good morning to her, imagining her reply. The locket was his most precious possession. Cyrus had burned most everything else after the fever took her 4 years ago. Her clothes, her books, even the colorful quilt she'd sewn during the long winter evenings. But he hadn't found the locket, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in Gray's room, alongside a few pencil drawings and a small book of poetry. From his bedroom window, Gray could see the ranch hands already moving about the property, preparing for another day of back-breaking work. The Broken Spur employed 15 men year-round, and twice that during roundup season. All were careful never to witness what happened inside the main house. The ranch itself was beautiful, 3,000 acres stretching from creek to foothills, with the best grazing land in the territory. On horseback, riding the far pastures, Gray sometimes felt something close to happiness. In those moments, he'd imagine simply continuing to ride, following the western horizon until he reached the ocean his mother had once described. Reality always intruded, usually in the form of Cyrus's pocket watch. "5 minutes late, boy," he'd say, as if recording the transgression in a ledger of failings. The creak of floorboards down the hall sent Gray's hands moving swiftly. The wooden horse disappeared into its hiding place beneath the loose board, and he was sitting on the edge of his bed, pulling on his boots when the door swung open. "Up with the sun, sir," Gray said, the words automatic. Cyrus Calloway filled the doorframe, already dressed in his customary black suit. At 50, he remained imposing, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard streaked with gray, and eyes that calculated value with every glance. "Martha's gone," he announced, watching Gray's face for reaction. "Took off in the night like a thief." Gray kept his expression carefully neutral despite the stab of loss. Martha had been his only ally, sneaking him extra food when Cyrus decided meals were privileges to be earned, tending his wounds after the worst of his father's lessons. "You'll take breakfast duties until I hire a replacement," Cyrus continued. "Don't burn the coffee like last time." "Yes, sir," Gray replied, eyes lowered as he'd learned to keep them. In the kitchen, Gray moved efficiently, having watched Martha enough to know the morning routine. Coffee boiling, bacon frying, biscuits warming. Through the window, he saw the cattle in the south pasture, peaceful in the morning light. He allowed himself a moment to wonder if Grey Wolf's offer of protection was real or just empty words. The previous night's beating had been among the worst. Cyrus had lost a bid to supply beef to Fort Apache, the contract going to the Diamond K spread instead, and Gray had made the mistake of being visible when his father returned home. 3 broken ribs, if Gray's self-diagnosis was correct. Breathing hurt, everything hurt. Martha had found him on the kitchen floor, pressed a cold cloth to his swollen face, and whispered, "This can't go on, child." Something in her voice had been different. Later, he'd heard her arguing with Cyrus, the first time anyone had dared. Now she was gone, and Gray was alone. He poured coffee into Cyrus's cup, careful not to spill a drop. Surviving meant anticipating what might trigger his father's rage. Some days nothing worked. As he set the table, Gray caught his reflection in Martha's polished copper pot. The bruise around his eye had darkened to purple, his lip was split, but it was the deadness in his own eyes that frightened him most. He was becoming a ghost in his own life. Outside, the ranch hands called to each other as they prepared for the day's work. Their normalcy seemed to belong to another world entirely. Grey Wolf knelt by Redemption Creek, watching the early light dance across water that knew no boundaries between white man's land and Apache territory. His weathered fingers untied the small medicine pouch that hung around his neck, a simple deerskin bag containing herbs, a hawk's feather, and a small stone worn smooth by time. The pouch had been his father's, and his grandfather's before that, passed down when he completed his coming-of-age ceremony at 13. He was the last of his line to carry it. 30 years had passed since the cavalry attack that decimated his band. He had been 15, away hunting with two older boys when the soldiers came. They returned to find their families gone, some dead, others taken to the reservation at San Carlos. The other boys had sought vengeance and died quickly. Grey Wolf had chosen a different path, survival. He scattered a pinch of sacred herbs into the flowing water, murmuring words in Apache that few living people still spoke. The ritual centered him, connecting past to present. Without it, he might have become lost between worlds long ago. His cabin stood a mile upstream, built with his own hands 16 years earlier. Simple but sturdy, with a garden of medicinal plants and a corral for his two horses. The townspeople called it the Indian's place, with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. They came to him when their children ran fevers that wouldn't break, when wounds festered, when pain grew too great to bear, yet they never invited him to break bread at their tables. Grey Wolf accepted this arrangement. He needed little from them beyond occasional supplies and to be left in peace. What troubled him were the things he saw that others pretended not to notice. For 3 years, he had observed the Callaway boy, had noticed the careful way he moved when injured, the hunched shoulders, the downcast eyes. He recognized the signs because he had once carried them himself under the brutal treatment of a cavalry sergeant who had taken an interest in the young Apache prisoner. Some wounds healed, others merely scabbed over, waiting to bleed anew. Grey Wolf returned the medicine pouch to its place against his chest. Rising, he surveyed the terrain with the practiced eye of a man who had learned early that awareness meant survival. 3 deer had passed in the night, a mountain lion had marked territory upstream, and someone, a boy by the footprint size, had stood watching his cabin from the forest edge. Inside his one-room dwelling, order prevailed. Herbs hung drying from ceiling beams. Supplies were stored in careful arrangements. A painted buffalo hide, acquired in trade with northern tribes, covered one wall, depicting the creation story of his people. His bedroll lay neatly against the wall, beside a worn copy of Leaves of Grass. The white doctor had given him the book years ago, surprised to learn the savage could read. Grey Wolf had taught himself from discarded newspapers and stolen moments with a missionary's Bible. Words were power. He had learned this lesson well. He prepared a simple breakfast of cornmeal and dried berries, eating without haste. Later, he would ride to the higher elevations to gather herbs that only grew in the mountain shadows. Perhaps he would hunt, though meat was not a daily necessity. The rhythm of his days followed patterns as old as the land itself. The town's reaction to his intervention yesterday did not surprise him. They feared what they did not understand, and they understood very little. Sheriff Miller was different, a man with shadows of his own who recognized truth when he heard it. But even Miller's tolerance had limits. Grey Wolf had not planned to speak in Garson's store. For years he had witnessed without acting, told himself it was not his place to interfere in white men's matters. But something in the boy's broken whisper had reached past caution, touching the part of him that remembered another child's pain, his own. He checked his rifle, a Winchester he maintained meticulously, and slipped extra ammunition into his pocket. Cyrus Callaway would not surrender his property, and he considered his son property, without a fight. A raven landed on the cabin roof, its harsh call breaking the morning silence. His people believed ravens carried messages between worlds. This one seemed to warn of approaching conflict. Grey Wolf nodded to the bird in acknowledgement. He had chosen his path. After decades of standing apart, he had finally stepped forward. Whatever came next, he would not step back. The leather belt hung on a hook by the door, its brass buckle gleaming in the lamplight. Once fine cordovan, now cracked and darkened with age and use, it had been Cyrus Callaway's father's belt before him. 3 generations of discipline, he called it when the whiskey loosened his tongue. Tonight the belt had broken. Not the leather that remained intact, but the buckle had snapped when it caught on the edge of the table during the worst of Cyrus's rage. The broken piece lay on the floor where it had fallen, reflecting the firelight like a malevolent eye. Grey curled against the wall where the final blow had thrown him, tasting blood and fighting to stay conscious. Through swollen eyes, he watched his father pace, muttering about the lost army contract, about betrayal, about weak men who didn't understand what it took to build something in this God-forsaken territory. The telegram had arrived that afternoon. The Diamond K Ranch had underbid the Broken Spur for the Fort Apache beef contract. The army would buy 500 head from Jacob Kincaid instead of Cyrus Calloway. Your fault, Cyrus had said when he found Gray in the barn. Your mother made you soft. Should have beaten it out of you years ago. The first strike had caught Gray across the shoulders. The second had knocked him to the ground. After that, he'd stopped counting. Mr. Calloway, Martha's voice came through the closed door. I've brought your evening meal. Cyrus straightened his vest, composing himself. Leave it, he ordered. Gray heard the tray being set down, but then, instead of retreating footsteps, Martha's voice came again. The boy needs tending. The boy, Cyrus replied coldly, needs to learn consequences. A long silence followed. Gray held his breath, knowing Martha was weighing her next words carefully. Your father was cruel to you, she finally said, her voice barely audible through the door. Does continuing the cruelty ease your pain, Mr. Calloway? The sound Cyrus made wasn't quite human, something between a snarl and a sob. Gray heard Martha's footsteps retreating rapidly down the hall. The door flew open, and Cyrus stormed out without a backward glance. Minutes passed. Gray focused on breathing through the pain, cataloguing injuries with detached precision. Ribs cracked, possibly broken, shoulder dislocated, face swollen. But he could move. He had to move. The kitchen door creaked open. Martha knelt beside him, her face a mask of controlled fury and grief. This ends tonight, she whispered, helping him sit up. I've got a cousin in Colorado, been after me to come north for years. He'll find me, Gray managed through split lips. Martha shook her head. Not where I'm sending you. She pressed a small pouch into his hand. $10, all I've saved. Get to town and find Sheriff Miller. She hesitated. Or the Indian. Gray Wolf. He's a healer. Why would he help me? Gray asked. Because he sees, Martha said simply. Now listen carefully. Your father's in the study with his whiskey. He'll be there till morning. The ranch hands are celebrating Sam's birthday in the bunkhouse. No one will see you if you take the creek path. Gray struggled to his feet, pain shooting through his side. You'll be blamed. I'm leaving too. Different direction. She touched his cheek gently. I should have done this years ago. Forgive me. Thunder rolled in the distance as Gray slipped through the kitchen door into the night. Rain was coming, a blessing and a curse. It would cover his tracks but make traveling harder. The creek path lay dark beneath the cottonwoods. Every step sent jolts of pain through Gray's body, but he pushed forward, focusing on Martha's directions. Follow the creek east until it bent north, cross at the shallow point, then head southeast toward town. The storm broke overhead as he reached the crossing. Lightning illuminated the swollen creek, already rising with runoff from the mountains. Gray hesitated. In daylight with his full strength, the crossing would be simple. Now it looked impossible. Behind him stretched the path back to the ranch, to waiting, to the belt. Before him lay uncertain footing, rushing water, and the slim hope of something different. Gray stepped into the current. The cold shocked his system, momentarily dulling the pain of his injuries. The water pulled at him, stronger than expected. Halfway across, his foot slipped on moss-covered stone. He went under, swallowing water, panic rising as the current dragged him downstream. His head broke the surface. Through the rain, he glimpsed the far bank and kicked desperately toward it. His fingers found purchase on exposed roots. Pulling himself up, he collapsed on the muddy shore, coughing and shivering, but alive and free. Dawn was breaking as Gray stumbled into Redemption Creek. The town was just coming to life, shopkeepers opening for business, the blacksmith lighting his forge. They stared as he passed, a boy-turned walking nightmare, face bruised beyond recognition, clothes torn and muddied. Gray made it as far as Garson's general store before his strength gave out. Inside, morning customers gathered around the pot-bellied stove, seeking warmth against the rain-chilled air. Conversation stopped as he entered. "My God," Mrs. Garson whispered, rushing toward him. "Someone fetch Dr. Parker." Gray looked up, seeing the faces of people who had always known and done nothing. Something broke inside him then, a dam holding back years of silence. "My father beat me all my life," he whispered. The words hung in the air, impossible to take back. The iron key was simple, handcrafted, unremarkable except for the small feather etched into its handle. Gray Wolf turned it in his palm, before inserting it into the cabin door's lock. The boy flinched at the sound of the tumbler clicking, a reaction born of years expecting punishment after any noise. "No one comes here without invitation," Gray Wolf said quietly, pushing the door open. You are safe. Gray hesitated at the threshold, clutching the blanket Mrs. Garson had wrapped around his shoulders. His eyes darted between the cabin's interior and the small group that had followed them from town, Sheriff Miller, Dr. Parker, and Mrs. Garson herself, her arms crossed in grim determination. "I can't hold Cyrus off legally for long," Sheriff Miller said, his voice low. "Maybe a day before the judge would force my hand. The law gives fathers broad rights." "The law," Dr. Parker interjected, "says nothing about beating a child half to death." The doctor's examination in the back room of Garson's store had revealed 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, now reset, and a tapestry of bruises old and new across Gray's back and torso. Gray Wolf met the sheriff's eyes. "One night, then we will see." Miller nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "I'll be back tomorrow." He turned to Gray. "Son, you speak the truth no matter who asks. You understand?" Gray nodded, his gaze fixed on the ground. The small party departed, leaving Gray Wolf and Gray alone at the cabin door. "Your choice," the Apache said, stepping aside. "Enter freely or not at all." It was the first real choice Gray could remember being given. He stepped inside. The cabin's interior surprised him, neat and orderly, with dried herbs hanging from rafters and shelves lined with jars, books, and carved wooden figures. A fire burned in the small stone hearth, casting warm light across the plank floor. No luxury, but clean and peaceful. Gray Wolf moved about efficiently, setting water to boil, preparing a poultice of herbs. He spoke little, which suited Gray. Words had always been dangerous things in his experience, easy to get wrong, easy to trigger rage. "Sit," Gray Wolf finally said, gesturing to a chair by the fire. "Your ribs need binding." Gray obeyed, wincing as he lowered himself. The Apache's hands were surprisingly gentle as he applied the herbal mixture to Gray's bruises, then wrapped clean bandages around his torso. "Medicine will reduce pain, help healing," Gray Wolf explained, "but sleep is best medicine." "He'll come for me," Gray whispered, his first words since they'd left town. Gray Wolf's expression didn't change. "Yes, he'll hurt you. He will try." The Apache finished his ministrations and moved to the fireplace, where a pot of stew simmered. He ladled a portion into a wooden bowl and placed it before Gray. "Eat, then rest." The stew was simple, rabbit, wild onions and herbs, but to Gray it tasted of something he couldn't name. Perhaps it was merely the absence of fear that seasoned it so sweetly. They ate in silence. When finished, Gray Wolf showed Gray to a small pallet near the fire. "Sleep now. Night brings counsel." Gray lay down, expecting sleep to elude him, as it often did at the ranch. Instead, warmed by the fire and wrapped in a buffalo robe that smelled of sage and pine, he felt his eyes grow heavy almost immediately. Just before drifting off, he saw Gray Wolf take up position in a chair by the window, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the darkening forest beyond. In the night, Gray woke once, heart pounding from familiar nightmares. He found Gray Wolf still awake, whittling a small piece of wood by firelight. "Bad dreams walk behind you," the Apache observed without looking up. "But they are just shadows of what has passed." "Does it ever stop?" Gray asked, his voice small in the darkness. "The fear." Gray Wolf's hands stilled. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "It changes, becomes something you carry, not something that carries you." He resumed his whittling. "Sleep now, I keep watch." Gray settled back, studying the play of firelight across the cabin's ceiling. For the first time in memory, he wasn't listening for footsteps in the hall, for the creak of his bedroom door. The sensation was so foreign, he almost couldn't name it. Safety. Outside, an owl called into the night. Gray Wolf whispered something in his native tongue, as if in response. The sound was soothing, like water over stone. Gray slept again, and this time no dreams disturbed him. Dawn found him still sleeping soundly. Gray Wolf moved silently about the cabin, preparing a simple breakfast, his movements betraying no fatigue from his night-long vigil. He knew what was coming, knew that this brief peace was merely the quiet before a storm. Cyrus Calloway would not surrender his son, his property, without a fight, and the town would have to choose sides in a battle they'd avoided for years. Gray Wolf had chosen his side the moment the boy had whispered his truth in Garson's store. Some choices, once made, could not be unmade. He fingered the key in his pocket, the first thing he had crafted when building this sanctuary years ago. a simple object that represented everything he had sought since watching his people fall under cavalry sabers, a safe place, a home, a boundary others must respect. Now he had offered that sanctuary to another. What would follow would test them both. Caraway's silver pocket watch gleamed in the firelight as he snapped it open, checked the time, and closed it with a sharp click. 10 hours since he'd discovered his son missing. 10 hours of mounting rage. The watch had been his grandfather's, a man who'd carved a cattle empire from wilderness, with nothing but determination and a willingness to do what weaker men would not. The timepiece represented everything Cyrus valued: precision, legacy, control. Found Martha's wagon abandoned at the North Crossroads, Sam Hollis reported, standing stiffly before Cyrus's desk. The foreman's face betrayed nothing, but his eyes carefully avoided the broken belt buckle still lying on the floor. "Looks like she took the stage to Tucson. And my son?" Cyrus asked, his voice unnaturally calm. "No sign along that route, but there was a storm last night, washed away any tracks." Cyrus closed his fingers around the watch, knuckles whitening. "Gather the men. All of them." 20 minutes later, the ranch hands stood uneasily in the main house's great room, a place most had never entered. Cyrus observed them from behind his desk, noting how they shuffled their feet, how their eyes darted to the luxuries their labor had purchased, the imported furniture, the crystal decanters, the oil paintings. "My son has been taken," Cyrus announced, "by the Apache, who calls himself Grey Wolf." A murmur ran through the assembled men. Sam Hollis frowned. "Taken, sir? I thought, you're not paid to think, Sam." Cyrus cut him off. "You're paid to follow orders." He rose, commanding the room by sheer force of presence. Gray was lured away during the storm. The Indian has been watching him, filling his head with savage ideas. The lie flowed easily. Cyrus had built his empire on such manipulations of markets, of men, of truth itself. "Sheriff Miller is compromised," he continued. "He's allowed my son to remain with his abductor rather than returning him to his family." He swept his gaze across the men. "I'm offering $50 to the man who brings my boy home, 100 to the man who brings me the Apache." The room stirred with interest. $50 was nearly 2 months' wages for a ranch hand. "Dead or alive?" asked Jenkins, a hard-faced new hire from Texas. Cyrus's expression didn't change. "I want my son unharmed." The implication hung in the air, clear as if he'd spoken it aloud. The Apache was a different matter. As the men filed out, Sam Hollis lingered behind. The foreman had worked the broken spur for 15 years, had known Gray since birth. "Mr. Calloway," he said hesitantly, "the boy was pretty beat up when Martha was stealing from me for years," Cyrus interrupted smoothly. "When caught, she fled and poisoned my son against me. As for his injuries, boys have accidents. They fall from horses. They get kicked by cattle." His voice hardened. "That will be all, Sam." Alone again, Cyrus poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and moved to the window. Beyond the manicured yard lay the empire he'd built, 3,000 acres of the best grazing land in the territory, 15,000 head of cattle, water rights that gave him control over every rancher for 20 miles, all of it meant for his son, all of it requiring a worthy heir. Catherine had ruined the boy, coddling him, filling his head with books and art, instead of the hard lessons a future cattle baron needed. Since her death, Cyrus had tried to correct the damage, to forge Gray into something stronger. The boy resisted. Always he resisted. Cyrus drained his glass, feeling the familiar burn of whiskey and rage. He couldn't lose control of his son. Too much depended on maintaining the Calloway legacy. Governor Matthews would be visiting next month. The territorial legislature was considering water rights legislation that could threaten Cyrus's hold on the valley. He needed to present the picture of respectability, of dynasty, the successful rancher, and his promising son, the future secured. A runaway boy, accusations of abuse, these could destroy everything he'd built. The pocket watch felt heavy in his hand. Time was running against him. He needed to reclaim his property quickly, before whispers became shouts, before the town forgot who controlled their prosperity. He moved to his desk and penned a quick note to Judge Everett, a man who owed his appointment to Cyrus's political connections. The law was malleable when one knew which pressure to apply. Outside, he heard the men preparing to ride out. Good men, most of them, loyal to their paymaster, as they should be. They would find the boy and bring him home. As for Grey Wolf, Cyrus had waited years for an excuse to rid the valley of the Apache. The man's healing skills had made him tolerated, but his presence had always been an affront, a reminder of what this land had been before men like Cyrus Calloway tamed it. The silver watch ticked steadily in his palm, counting down to a confrontation long overdue. Cyrus smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. By tomorrow night, the natural order would be restored. His son would be home, learning necessary lessons about obedience. The Apache would be gone, one way or another, and Redemption Creek would remember who truly owned this valley. Sheriff Thomas Miller turned the tarnished badge in his hands, running his thumb over the dents and scratches that marked his 15 years of service. The Silver Star had belonged to his predecessor, and 2 men before that, passed down like a burden, rather than an honor. The night had settled deep around Grey Wolf's cabin when Miller arrived, tethering his horse a discreet distance away and approaching on foot. No lantern guided his path. The quarter moon provided just enough light for a man who knew these woods. He found Grey Wolf sitting on the porch, as if expecting him. The Apache nodded once but didn't speak. "Boy sleeping?" Miller asked quietly. "Yes, first real rest in years, I suspect." Miller leaned against the porch rail, badge still in hand. "Cyrus is gathering men, offering bounties. I know. He's calling it a kidnapping." A ghost of a smile crossed Grey Wolf's face. The white man's law is flexible. Miller couldn't argue. He'd spent years watching that flexibility work for men like Cyrus Calloway and against men like Grey Wolf. "I need to see the boy," he said finally. "Need to hear it from him directly." Grey Wolf studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Quietly, dreams still chase him. Inside, the cabin was warm and smelled of herbs and wood smoke. Grey lay curled beneath a buffalo hide near the hearth, his bruised face finally peaceful in sleep. Miller knelt beside him, hesitating before gently touching his shoulder. The boy's eyes flew open, instantly alert with the wariness of the chronically abused. "It's just me, son," Miller said softly. "Sheriff Miller." Grey relaxed slightly, pushing himself up to sitting. "Have you come to take me back?" His voice was flat, resigned. "No, not tonight." Miller settled onto a nearby chair. "I need you to tell me, straight out. Your father did this to you?" "Yes, sir." "How long?" Grey looked down at his hands. "Always, as far back as I can remember. Your mama knew." A flash of pain crossed the boy's face. "She tried to stop it, made it worse when she did." Miller nodded slowly. Catherine Calloway's bruises had been explained away as accidents too. The whole town had pretended to believe it. "Why'd you run now, after all this time?" "Martha helped me, said it was time." Grey's voice dropped to a whisper. "He broke his belt buckle on me this time. I thought he might not stop." Miller felt something twist inside him. Guilt, shame, anger. He'd known. God help him. He'd known for years and done nothing. "I'll need you to tell this to Judge Harmon when he comes through next week," he said. "Every detail. Can you do that?" Grey nodded, eyes still downcast. "Get some rest now." Miller stood, placing a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. "You're safe tonight." Outside again, Miller found Grey Wolf whittling by moonlight. "I've known Cyrus Calloway for 20 years, the sheriff said, pinning his badge back on his vest. "Watched him build the biggest spread in the territory. Stood by while he bought the town council, the water rights, and half the politicians in Arizona." He sighed heavily. "And I've known what he was doing to that boy for at least 5 years. Why did you do nothing?" Grey Wolf asked. The question simple, without accusation. Miller had asked himself the same question on the ride over. Fear, maybe. Convenience. The lie was easier than the truth. He looked toward the dark outline of the mountains. "A man can get used to looking the other way, until he can't," Grey Wolf observed. "Until he can't," Miller agreed. A twig snapped in the darkness. Both men tensed, Miller's hand moving to his gun. "It's me," called a familiar voice. "Doc Parker." The doctor emerged from the trees, medical bag in hand. "Figured the boy could use another looking at," he explained, climbing the porch steps. "And I thought you should know. Cyrus went to Reverend Abernathy this evening, spinning a tale about his son being kidnapped by a savage who's turned the boy against his father." Miller cursed under his breath. "The Reverend believe him. Reverend's smarter than he looks." Parker replied. He asked why, if it was a kidnapping, Cyrus didn't bring charges official-like. The doctor set his bag down, but half the congregation was there, hearing Cyrus's version. Town splitting down the middle on this. Grey Wolf remained silent, still whittling, but his eyes were alert, missing nothing. Cyrus sent telegrams too, Parker continued, to Judge Everett in Tucson and Governor Matthews in Prescott. Man's pulling every string he's got. Miller nodded grimly. We've got maybe 3 days before official pressure starts. Judge Harmon won't be through for a week. The boy needs more than 3 days to heal, Parker said. Those ribs won't mend for weeks. Healing takes time the law may not give, Grey Wolf said quietly, but hiding brings its own wounds. The 3 men fell silent, an unlikely alliance formed in the space of a day. The lawman who'd looked away too long, the doctor who'd treated injuries without asking questions, and the outsider who'd finally spoken the truth no one wanted to hear. Miller fingered his badge thoughtfully. I took an oath to uphold the law, he said slowly. But there's law, and there's justice. Sometimes they're not the same thing. Parker opened his medical bag. I'll see to the boy. You two figure out how to keep Cyrus Calloway and his hired guns at bay for the next few days. As the doctor disappeared inside, Miller turned to Grey Wolf. You ready for what's coming? The Apache set aside his whittling and met Miller's gaze directly. I have been ready since the day they killed my family, Sheriff. The question is, are you? The fishing rod was nothing like the store-bought bamboo pole Gray had seen in Garson's general store. This one was handcrafted, a slender willow branch, carefully cured and wrapped with sinew where a length of braided horsehair line was attached. Simple, functional, beautiful in its purpose. Water speaks, Grey Wolf said, demonstrating how to hold the rod. Listen with your eyes. The morning sun dappled Redemption Creek with golden shadow as Gray watched the current, trying to see what the Apache saw. His ribs ached less today, wrapped in the herb-infused bandages Doc Parker had applied the night before. There, Grey Wolf pointed to a subtle ripple where the stream bent around a half-submerged log. Trout waits in slow water beside fast water. Food comes to him without effort. He handed the rod to Gray, who took it awkwardly, unused to holding anything designed for pleasure rather than work. Like this, he asked, mimicking Grey Wolf's grip. The Apache adjusted his fingers slightly. Hold with purpose, but without tension. Too tight, you break. Too loose, you lose. Gray nodded, understanding the lesson extended beyond fishing. Now, cast. Grey Wolf demonstrated the motion, and Gray attempted to copy it. His first try tangled the line in overhead branches. His second landed well short of the target. Sorry, he muttered, cheeks flushing with familiar shame. Grey Wolf's expression remained unchanged. Try again. No anger, no disappointment, just the simple invitation to continue. Gray cast a third time. The line arced gracefully, landing near the ripple Grey Wolf had indicated. Good, the Apache said. Now wait. They stood in companionable silence, watching the current. Gray found himself breathing easier, the constant knot in his stomach loosening slightly. My father, he began, then stopped, unsure how to frame the question. Was he a fisherman? Grey Wolf asked. Gray shook his head. No, he said it was a waste of time, said a man should buy what he needs, not scavenge like an Indian. He winced, realizing too late how the words might sound. Grey Wolf seemed unoffended. Your father builds fences, between himself and the land, between himself and others. He gestured at the flowing water. The creek makes no fences, it flows where it must. Were you afraid of your father? Gray asked suddenly. The question hung between them. For a moment Gray thought he'd overstepped, but then Grey Wolf nodded slightly. All sons fear their fathers in some way, he said, but my father's hands never struck in anger. He was stern but fair. When I failed, he showed me why. When I succeeded, he was pleased but expected more next time. His eyes grew distant. He died protecting our family when the bluecoats came. I'm sorry, Gray said softly. My father taught me to hunt, to track, to respect the earth, Grey Wolf continued. But most important, he taught me that strength does not need to prove itself with violence. A tug on the line interrupted them. Pull now, Grey Wolf instructed. Gentle but firm. Gray did as told, feeling the answering resistance of a living creature. Excitement surged through him as he carefully played the fish, following Grey Wolf's quiet directions until a good-sized trout flopped on the bank. I did it, Gray exclaimed, then immediately looked embarrassed at his childish outburst. Grey Wolf picked up the fish, holding it with respect. Your first catch, a good sign. He showed Gray how to dispatch it quickly and humanely. We take life to sustain life, never wastefully, never cruelly. They caught 2 more fish before returning to the cabin. Grey Wolf taught Grey how to clean them, explaining each step patiently. No task was beneath notice, no question too simple to answer. As they prepared their meal together, Grey found himself relaxing into the rhythm of work, shared rather than commanded. When he accidentally dropped a plate, his body instinctively tensed, waiting for the blow or harsh word that had always followed such mistakes at the ranch. Instead, Grey Wolf simply picked up the unbroken plate and handed it back. "Hands learn by doing," he said. "Mistakes are part of learning." Over their simple meal of fresh trout and wild greens, Grey finally asked the question that had been haunting him. "Why did you help me in the store?" Grey Wolf considered before answering. "Many years ago, I was taken prisoner by bluecoats. There was a sergeant who took pleasure in pain." His voice remained steady, but something in his eyes shifted. "One night, an older soldier stopped him, risked much to help a young Apache he did not know." He looked directly at Grey. "Sometimes a circle must be completed." "Will my father come for me?" Grey asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes, he sees you as his possession, not his son." Grey Wolf's gaze was compassionate but unflinching. "But you are neither. You are yourself." Grey looked down at his hands, hands that had just caught fish, prepared food, created rather than merely served. For the first time, he glimpsed a future beyond fear, beyond the broken spur's boundaries. "Could you teach me more?" he asked quietly. "About fishing and plants and everything." Grey Wolf nodded, a rare smile briefly transforming his weathered face. "Tomorrow, we begin with tracking. Today, we rest and prepare." He pointed to Grey's barely touched plate. "Eat. Strength comes from many sources." As Grey finished his meal, he realized he felt something unfamiliar, a lightness, a space opening within him where dread had lived for as long as he could remember. It felt a little like hope. The leather-bound ledger lay open on Mayor Wilson's desk, its neat columns of figures telling the story of Redemption Creek in the language of dollars and cents. Nearly every page bore Cyrus Calloway's name. Loans to the mercantile when it struggled through the drought of '77, financing for the new church bell, credit extended to the blacksmith for modern equipment. "He owns half the businesses in town outright," Mayor Wilson said, running a finger down the latest page. "The other half owe him money or favors." The portly man closed the ledger with a sigh. "How exactly am I supposed to stand against him, Sheriff?" Thomas Miller stood at the window of the mayor's office, watching the growing crowd outside the saloon. "Not asking you to stand against anyone, Harold. Just asking you not to get in the way of justice." "Justice?" The mayor barked a humorless laugh. "That's mighty subjective when a man's son is involved." The saloon across the street had been filling since noon. Word had spread quickly about Grey Calloway's accusations and his refuge with Grey Wolf. Now the town was taking sides. "I'd better get over there," Miller said, settling his hat firmly. "Drunk men make poor decisions." Outside, the autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and tension. Miller nodded to Martha Henson, who sat on the boarding house porch with several of the town's women gathered around her. She'd returned on the morning stage, having gone only as far as the county line before turning back. "Couldn't leave the boy to face it alone," she'd told Miller earlier. "Been turning a blind eye too long as it is." The saloon fell silent as Miller entered. Nearly 30 men crowded the space, creating unusual companions, ranchers beside shopkeepers, cowboys next to the bank clerk. Cyrus Calloway stood at the bar, glass in hand, holding court. "All I'm saying is there's a proper legal process," Cyrus was explaining, his voice carrying the reasonable tone of a man discussing business rather than his son. "If the Apache has concerns, he should have come to me directly. Taking a man's son. Nobody took anybody," Sam Hollis interrupted. The broken spur foreman leaned against the far wall, expression troubled. The boy ran. "We all know why." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cyrus's smile tightened imperceptibly. "Sam, I understand you're upset. Martha filled your head with lies before she left. But think, have you ever seen me lay a hand on Grey?" "Not personally," Sam admitted, "but I've seen the aftermath plenty. Boys have accidents," Cyrus said smoothly. "Grey's always been reckless. Falls from horses, trouble with cattle. That what happened to Catherine too." The question came from Doc Parker, who had entered behind Miller. "She have accidents as well." The saloon went deadly quiet. Catherine Calloway's death had been attributed to fever, but rumors had persisted. "You're on dangerous ground, Doctor," Cyrus said softly. "I've treated that boy 16 times in 4 years," Parker continued unfazed. "Broken arm, cracked ribs, concussion." He looked around the room. "Any of your sons have that many accidents?" Several men shifted uncomfortably, eyes finding the floor. "The boy's confused," Reverend Abernathy interjected from his corner table. "The Apache has turned him against his father with heathen ideas. The 5th commandment is clear. Honor thy father," Miller finished. "But the good book also says something about not provoking your children to wrath, doesn't it, Reverend?" Abernathy flushed. "Context, Sheriff, context. I'm offering $100 to any man who helps recover my son," Cyrus announced. "Changing tactics. 200 to whoever brings me the Apache who's poisoned his mind." Some of the younger ranch hands straightened with interest. "That sounds remarkably like a bounty," Miller observed, "which would be illegal in this territory." "It's a reward for the safe return of my son," Cyrus corrected. "Entirely legal. And the Apache? A separate matter." Miller stepped into the center of the room. "I'm serving notice here and now. Anyone who approaches Grey Wolf's cabin armed and threatening will be arrested. Judge Harmon will be here in 5 days to sort this matter legally." 5 days? Cyrus's voice hardened. "My son could be halfway to Mexico by then. Your son can barely walk with the injuries he sustained at your hand," Doc Parker said bluntly. "He's not going anywhere." Elmer Whitfield, the barber, cleared his throat. "What if Cyrus is right, though? What if the boy is confused? We can't just take a child's word over his father's." "Why not?" Martha Henson stood in the doorway, her normally gentle face set with determination. "I worked in that house for 20 years, saw what happened to Catherine, seen what's been happening to Gray." "Martha," Cyrus said, warning in his tone, "remember who paid your wages all those years." "That's why I kept quiet," she acknowledged. "Needed the job, needed the money." She looked around the room. "Just like most of you need his business or his loans or his goodwill." No one contradicted her. "But there comes a point," she continued, "where silence makes you part of the evil. I reached mine when I found that boy half dead on the kitchen floor 2 nights ago." Cyrus set down his glass. "I won't stand here and be slandered." He surveyed the room, noting who met his gaze and who didn't. "I'll be at the ranch, making arrangements to recover my son legally. Those who support me and who expect my support in future business matters know where to find me." The threat lingered in the air as he left, several men following in his wake. Miller turned to those remaining. "You all know me, known me 15 years as sheriff. I don't take sides lightly." He paused, making eye contact around the room. "But I've seen that boy's injuries, heard his story, and I'm standing with him." Sam Hollis pushed away from the wall. "Count me in, Sheriff. Seen enough to know which way the wind blows." Slowly, men began to voice their support. Not all, perhaps not even most, but enough to give Miller hope. Outside, the autumn sun was setting, painting Redemption Creek in gold and shadow. A town built on second chances was facing its moment of truth. The Dreamcatcher hung from the cabin's ceiling beam, its willow hoop enclosing an intricate web of sinew and beads that caught the moonlight filtering through the window. Grey Wolf had crafted it that afternoon, his fingers working deftly while explaining its purpose to Gray. "Dreams travel through the night air," he had said, weaving the pattern. "Bad dreams become trapped in the web. Good dreams know the way through, sliding down the feathers to the sleeper below." Gray had watched, fascinated by the creation of something whose sole purpose was protection rather than profit. Now, in the darkest hour of night, the Dreamcatcher swayed slightly in the draft from the chimney. Beneath it, Gray thrashed in his sleep, locked in the grip of memories stronger than any woven charm. "No," he whimpered, "please, no more." In his dream, he was back at the ranch, cornered in the tack room. His father's belt whistled through the air, and Gray could feel each stroke as if it were happening now. The searing pain, the helpless rage, the knowledge that no one would come, no matter how loudly he cried. "Boy." The voice penetrated his nightmare, firm but gentle. Not his father's voice. "Gray, wake now." He jolted awake, gasping to find Grey Wolf kneeling beside his pallet. The Apache's face showed no alarm, only quiet understanding. "The past walks in your dreams," Grey Wolf said, offering a cup of water. Gray took it with shaking hands, embarrassed by his weakness. "I'm sorry I woke you. I was awake." Grey Wolf settled cross-legged beside him. "Night is when spirits speak. I listen." The fire had burned low, casting the cabin in amber shadows. Outside, an owl called, the sound floating through the stillness. "What were you dreaming?" Grey Wolf asked. Grey stared into his water cup. "The tack room. That's where it usually happened." He swallowed hard. "No windows, door locks from outside." Grey Wolf nodded once, his expression unchanging. "Sometimes," Grey continued hesitantly, "he would leave me there afterward. Hours, sometimes all night." The words came faster now, as if a dam had broken. "It was so dark. I could hear the horses moving, rats in the grain sacks. I'd count seconds, then minutes, trying to guess when he'd come back. And when he returned, I had to thank him," Grey whispered, "for the lesson." Grey Wolf was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into the fire with a stick, stirring the embers until flames licked upward again, pushing back the darkness. "After the soldiers killed my family," he said, "they took me to a place called Fort Grant. I was 15. They put me in a storage room beneath the barracks. No windows. For 3 months I saw sunlight, only when they brought me out to work." Grey listened, surprised. Grey Wolf rarely spoke of his past. "At night, I would hear the sergeant's boots on the steps," the Apache continued. "Not every night, but often enough that fear became my constant companion." His voice remained steady, but his eyes reflected the firelight like obsidian. He enjoyed causing pain. Said he was teaching the savage to be civilized. "How did you survive?" Grey asked. "I made a world inside my mind where he could not follow. I remembered the mountains, the songs, the stories of my people." Grey Wolf tapped his temple gently. "What is in here, no one can take unless you surrender it." "I tried to be brave," Grey said, shame coloring his voice. "But I always broke in the end, always begged him to stop." "That is not weakness," Grey Wolf said firmly. "The body speaks its truth. Only fools and madmen deny pain." He reached for a small pouch and extracted a pinch of herbs, casting them into the fire. A sweet, calming scent filled the cabin. "The old ones taught that fear is a messenger, not an enemy," he continued. "It warns of danger, tells us when to fight or flee. But like any messenger, once it has delivered its news, it should depart." "Mine never leaves," Grey admitted, "because the danger never left." Grey Wolf pointed to the dream catcher. "But now you are here, not there. The danger is outside, not inside these walls." "He'll come for me," Grey said, voicing his constant dread. "Yes." Grey Wolf didn't offer false comfort, "but you are not alone now." He taught Grey a breathing technique then, a way to calm the racing heart and panicked mind. "Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 7, release for 8, again and again until the body remembered it was safe in the present moment." As Grey practiced, the terror receded slightly. Not gone, but manageable. "When I was your age," Grey Wolf said, "my father taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. I did not understand then. It took many years." "Do you still have nightmares?" Grey asked. "About the fort?" Grey Wolf nodded. "Less often now, but some wounds leave scars that ache when the weather changes." He touched the physical scar on his face briefly. "We carry our stories in body and spirit. The pain changes shape, becomes something we know rather than something that knows us." Grey pondered this, finding a strange comfort in the idea that healing didn't require forgetting. "Try to sleep now," Grey Wolf said, adding another log to the fire. "I will keep watch." Grey settled back onto his pallet, eyes drawn to the dream catcher overhead. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for understanding." Grey Wolf's expression softened momentarily. That is what fathers should do. As Grey drifted towards sleep again, he felt the weight of a hand resting lightly on his shoulder, tentative, as if Grey Wolf was unsure of the gesture, but offering it nonetheless. Grey didn't pull away. For the first time in memory, he felt the touch of a hand that intended comfort, not pain. The custody petition lay on Judge Harmon's makeshift desk in Sheriff Miller's office, its formal legal language a stark contrast to the human drama it represented. The document bore the territorial seal and the precise handwriting of Miller's deputy, who had transcribed the judge's dictation. "Temporary guardianship," Judge Harmon explained, tapping the paper with a gnarled finger. "Pending a formal hearing in the territorial capital." The white-haired jurist had arrived a day earlier than expected, having pushed his circuit schedule upon receiving urgent telegrams from both Sheriff Miller and Cyrus Calloway. Across the desk, Grey Wolf stood motionless, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Beside him, Grey sat hunched in a chair, eyes darting nervously between the adults. "This is highly irregular," the judge continued. "An Apache seeking custody of a white child. I'm not aware of any precedent." He glanced at Miller. "The territorial legislature won't like it. The legislature isn't living with broken ribs," Doc Parker interjected from his position by the window. The doctor had insisted on attending after examining Grey that morning. Judge Harmon frowned at the interruption. At 68, with 30 years on the bench, he was accustomed to controlling his courtroom, even when that courtroom was a sheriff's office in a frontier town. "Doctor, I appreciate your concern for the boy's welfare, but there are legal considerations here that transcend the immediate situation." The judge turned to Grey. "Son, I'll need to speak with you privately. A formal deposition." Grey's eyes sought Grey Wolf's, receiving a slight nod of encouragement. "Just tell what happened," Miller said gently. "The truth is all the judge needs." As the others filed out, Judge Harmon moved to close the office door. He paused, noting how Grey tensed at the sound of the latch clicking. "Perhaps we'll leave it open a crack," the judge said, his tone softening slightly. He returned to his seat, taking a moment to study the boy before him, thin, bruised, but with a steady gaze that belied his years. "I've been riding circuit in this territory for 15 years, Harmon began. "Seen all manner of disputes, crimes, and family troubles. Never get used to cases involving children, though." He leaned forward. "I need you to understand something important. You're not on trial here. Nothing that's happened is your fault." Grey nodded without speaking. "Tell me about your father," the judge prompted. Grey's account was delivered in a quiet, measured voice, the beatings that had begun as far back as he could remember, the escalation after his mother's death 4 years ago, the most recent incident that had driven him to flee. Judge Harmon took notes, interrupting occasionally with clarifying questions. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes grew increasingly troubled. "Why the Apache?" he asked finally. "Why go to him rather than Sheriff Miller or the doctor?" Grey considered the question. "He was the only one who ever really saw me," he said simply. Everyone else looked away. The judge nodded slowly. "And how has he treated you these past days?" "He's teaching me things, fishing, tracking, how to breathe when I'm scared." Grey's voice strengthened. "He doesn't hit, even when I make mistakes. A rather low bar for guardianship," the judge observed dryly. "He listens," Grey continued, as if the judge hadn't spoken. "And he understands because bad things happened to him too." Outside the office, voices rose in the main room of the jailhouse. The judge sighed, recognizing the commanding tone of Cyrus Calloway among them. "Your father is here," he told Grey, watching the boy's reaction carefully. Grey went pale but straightened in his chair. "Yes, sir." "Are you afraid of him?" "Yes, sir." "Do you believe he'll hurt you if you return to the ranch?" Grey met the judge's eyes directly. "I believe he'll kill me, sir. Maybe not right away, but eventually." The conviction in the boy's voice gave Judge Harmon pause. In 30 years on the bench, he had developed an ear for truth. What he heard now was not a child's exaggeration, but a simple statement of perceived fact. He gathered his notes and rose. "Wait here," he instructed, before stepping into the main room where Cyrus Calloway stood flanked by his attorney, a slick-looking man from Tucson. "Judge Harmon," Cyrus greeted him with forced joviality. "I trust you've seen through this absurd situation. My son belongs at home, not with some Apache squatter." "Mr. Calloway," the judge acknowledged coolly, "I've just taken your son's deposition." "The boy is confused," Cyrus's attorney interjected. "Impressionable. Whatever he said has been influenced by his time with the Indian." "That's a convenient interpretation," Judge Harmon replied. "Unfortunately, his broken ribs and the documentation of previous injuries suggest otherwise." "Boys have accidents," Cyrus said smoothly, "with remarkable frequency in your household, it seems." The judge turned to Miller. "Sheriff, I'd like to examine the medical records Dr. Parker mentioned." As the doctor produced his notes, Cyrus's demeanor hardened. "I have rights," he stated flatly. "A father's authority over his minor child is absolute under territorial law." "Not absolute," Judge Harmon corrected. "The law also requires proper care and treatment. Based on the evidence before me, I'm granting temporary custody to..." He consulted the document. Grey Wolf, until a formal hearing can be arranged in Prescott next month. This is outrageous, Cyrus's attorney sputtered. You can't give a white child to an Indian. I can, and I have, the judge replied firmly. The boy's welfare is my primary concern. Cyrus stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous pitch. You've made a serious mistake, Judge. I have friends in the governor's office who will be very interested in your handling of this case. Judge Harmon, who had faced down threats from men far more dangerous than Cyrus Calloway during his years on the frontier bench, merely raised an eyebrow. Is that an attempt to influence a judicial officer, Mr. Calloway? Because that would be a felony in this territory. Cyrus fell silent, jaw working. The temporary custody order stands, the judge concluded, signing the document with a flourish. Sheriff Miller will enforce it. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. As he handed the signed paper to Grey Wolf, Judge Harmon added quietly, Take good care of him. You've taken on a grave responsibility. The Apache accepted the document with dignified restraint. I understand responsibility, Judge, perhaps better than many. Judge Harmon nodded, sensing the truth in those words. Then he gathered his coat and hat, preparing to continue his circuit to the next town. Justice never rested long in one place on the frontier. The leather-bound drawing book had been Dr. Parker's gift, delivered with a bundle of other necessities the day after Judge Harmon's ruling. Its pages were thick cream parchment, the kind Gray had seen in the mercantile, but never dared ask for. Inside the cover, the doctor had written simply, For new beginnings. Gray sat cross-legged on the cabin porch, pencil moving carefully across the open page. He was sketching the yarrow plant Grey Wolf had shown him that morning, trying to capture the delicate architecture of its flower clusters. The stem must be straight, Grey Wolf observed, pausing in his work of hanging dried herbs from the porch rafters. Medicine lives in the details. Gray nodded, erasing a line and redrawing it with more precision. For the past week, Grey Wolf had been teaching him to identify healing plants, which leaves to gather for fever, which roots for pain, which berries were food and which were poison. My mother liked to draw, Gray said, shading the flower's tiny petals. She kept a book of flowers from back east, said they reminded her of home. Grey Wolf continued his methodical work, giving Gray space to speak or be silent as he chose. The boy had begun to share such fragments more frequently, small memories surfacing like bubbles in still water. What was she like? Grey Wolf asked. Gray considered this, pencil pausing. Gentle, she sang while she worked. She smelled like lavender water. His expression clouded. She tried to protect me, made things worse sometimes. Grey Wolf nodded, understanding the complex dynamics of an abusive household. She did what she could with what she had. She taught me to read, Gray continued, returning to his drawing. In secret, when father was away on business, said every man should know Shakespeare and the Bible. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I liked Shakespeare better, all that fighting and love and ghosts. They worked in companionable silence for a time, Gray drawing, Grey Wolf preparing his medicines. The routine of the past 10 days had been simple but purposeful. Mornings spent learning tracking and plant identification, afternoons dedicated to practical skills, fire building, basic cooking, how to stitch torn clothing. Why do you teach me these things? Gray asked suddenly. Indian things. Grey Wolf tied off a bundle of sage before answering. Not Indian things, human things. He gestured toward the forest and mountains beyond. The land speaks the same language to all who listen. My people simply remembered how to hear it. Gray pondered this, adding the final details to his yarrow sketch before turning to a fresh page. Without conscious thought, he began drawing Grey Wolf's profile against the backdrop of mountains. There are many ways to be a man, Grey Wolf continued. Your father knows only one, to control, to dominate, to take. He secured another herb bundle. There are other paths, to protect, to nurture, to give back what the earth provides. Is that what your father taught you? Yes, and now I teach you. Grey Wolf's voice held no hesitation, not to make you Apache, but to help you find your own way. Gray looked up from his drawing. What if Cyrus takes me back? He still couldn't bring himself to say father when speaking of Cyrus. The paper the judge signed gives us time, Grey Wolf replied. But papers can be changed by men with power. His expression remained calm, but his eyes held steady determination. If that happens, you will carry what you have learned here. No one can take knowledge from your mind or strength from your spirit. Gray nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. Grey Wolf was preparing him for any outcome, including return to the Broken Spur. Sheriff Miller says men are watching the cabin, Gray said. Cyrus's men. Yes, from the ridge to the south. They think I don't see them. Grey Wolf's mouth quirked slightly. We will give them nothing to report except an old Indian teaching a boy to fish and gather plants. Gray returned to his drawing, capturing the weathered contours of his teacher's face. The past days had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The constant knot of fear in his stomach had loosened. He stood straighter. He asked questions without bracing for a blow. Small freedoms, new beginnings. That evening, after a simple supper, Grey Wolf examined Gray's drawings in the lamplight. He studied the careful botanical illustrations, noting the accuracy of leaf shapes and flower structures. Good eyes, he commented. You see what is truly there, not what you expect to see. He turned to the portrait Gray had drawn of him and fell silent. Gray watched anxiously. Is it bad? Grey Wolf shook his head slowly. It is how you see me. His finger traced the lines that Gray had drawn with unexpected confidence. A gift, to see oneself through another's eyes. He handed back the book. Tomorrow we will learn how these plants are prepared for medicine. Your hands must know what your eyes have seen. Gray carefully stored the drawing book beneath his sleeping pallet. Another day had passed without Cyrus appearing to reclaim him. Another night would come without the dread of footsteps in the hallway. Grey Wolf, he said hesitantly, at the ranch after it happened, Cyrus would make me thank him for the lesson. He swallowed hard. Should I thank you for teaching me? The Apache studied him for a long moment. Between teacher and student, between father and son, gratitude is not demanded, it is earned. He added a log to the fire. When your heart feels thanks, your eyes will speak it. Words are not needed. Gray nodded, a weight lifting that he hadn't realized he still carried. One more chain broken, one more step toward becoming someone new, someone who might someday leave fear behind entirely. The Winchester rifle gleamed dully in the moonlight as Grey Wolf lifted it from its pegs above the cabin door. He'd hoped never to use it against men again, had kept it primarily for hunting and protection against mountain lions. But the sounds that had woken him left no doubt. Men were approaching through the forest, making more noise than they realized. "Gray," he whispered, gently shaking the boy's shoulder. "Wake up," silently. Gray's eyes opened immediately, years of survival instincts overriding the deepness of his sleep. Grey Wolf pressed a finger to his lips, then gestured toward the back window. Understanding flickered across Gray's face, followed by fear, then determination. They had prepared for this possibility. 3 days had passed since Judge Harmon's ruling, and Sheriff Miller had warned them that Cyrus was growing increasingly erratic, making threats in the saloon after too much whiskey. Grey Wolf checked the rifle's action, loaded with 5 rounds as he always kept it, while Gray quickly pulled on his boots and grabbed the small pack they kept ready by the door. Essential medicines, jerky, the flint and steel, a canteen, enough to survive if they needed to flee into the high country. A branch snapped outside, closer than before. Grey Wolf extinguished the small lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness, broken only by faint moonlight through the windows. He could make out at least 4 men approaching from the front, too many to fight if it came to that. "Remember the hollow oak," he murmured to Gray. "If we're separated." Gray nodded. They had established the meeting place during their tracking lessons, a massive oak with a cavity large enough to shelter a boy, located 2 miles upstream where the creek narrowed between rocky banks. "Now," Grey Wolf directed, easing the back window open. "Stay low. Move like smoke." Gray slipped through the opening with surprising grace for a boy still healing from broken ribs. Grey Wolf followed, Winchester in hand, closing the window behind them. They melted into the shadows of the pine trees just as voices became audible at the front of the cabin. "Should be asleep by now," a man whispered hoarsely. "Jenkins, you and Taylor take the back. We'll go in the front. Remember, Calloway wants the boy unharmed." "And the Indian?" another voice asked. A pause. "Use your judgment." Grey Wolf recognized the implication. Cyrus's men had permission to kill if they deemed it necessary. He touched Gray's shoulder, guiding him deeper into the forest as they circled away from the approaching men. They moved in silence through the familiar terrain, Grey Wolf leading them on a route that left minimal signs of passage. The quarter moon provided just enough light to navigate without stumbling, though Grey occasionally grabbed Grey Wolf's sleeve when his foot found uncertain ground. Behind them, raised voices indicated the men had discovered the empty cabin. Soon they would begin tracking. Grey Wolf increased their pace, angling toward the creek where water would hide their trail. "They'll expect us to go upstream," he whispered, helping Grey down a steep embankment. "So we go down, then circle back. Confusion is our ally." They waded into the cold water, moving carefully over slippery stones. Grey's breathing came quick and shallow, pain from his healing ribs, fear, or both. Yet he made no complaint, focusing entirely on each step as Grey Wolf had taught him. After 200 yards downstream, Grey Wolf guided them out onto a shelf of bare rock that would hold no footprints. From there they followed a game trail that looped north toward higher ground. "Sheriff Miller," Grey panted as they paused on a ridge overlooking the valley. "Should we try to reach town?" Grey Wolf considered this, scanning the landscape below. Pinpricks of torchlight showed Cyrus's men spreading out from the cabin, quartering the ground like experienced hunters. "No," he decided. "Town is 4 miles across open country, too exposed." He pointed west, toward the craggy foothills. "We go up. They won't expect that." As they resumed their careful progress, a new sound reached them, a distant shout, then multiple voices raised in alarm. Grey Wolf froze, listening intently. "What is it?" Grey whispered. "A fight," Grey Wolf replied, frowning, "near the main trail to town." They changed direction, moving cautiously toward the disturbance. From a concealed position among boulders, they observed a scene illuminated by scattered torches. Sheriff Miller lay on the ground, one hand pressed to his head. 2 deputies stood with weapons drawn, facing off against 6 of Cyrus's ranch hands. "This is official business," one of the ranch hands was saying. "Mr. Calloway's just retrieving his son from the Indian who took him." "Judge Harmon's order says otherwise," Miller replied, struggling to his feet with the help of a deputy. "You boys are interfering with a lawful custody arrangement. That's a crime in this territory. Ain't no judge giving an Apache rights to a white boy," another man growled. "Not any judge who wants to keep his position." Grey Wolf felt Grey tense beside him. The confrontation below could easily turn deadly. Sheriff Miller was outnumbered, and at least 2 of Cyrus's men had their hands hovering near holstered pistols. "We should help," Grey whispered. Grey Wolf placed a restraining hand on the boy's shoulder. "More violence won't bring safety," he said quietly. "We need to think beyond this moment." A plan was forming in his mind. The ranch hands searching the woods would continue for hours. Sheriff Miller was injured but still standing, not in immediate danger. This clash had created an opportunity. The reservation, Grey Wolf decided. "My mother's sister's family. 20 miles west. They will shelter us until the territorial hearing." Grey looked uncertain. "But Sheriff Miller is doing his duty," Grey Wolf finished. "And I am doing mine, keeping you safe." He led Grey away from the confrontation, circling north toward the Apache reservation, where he still had distant kin. It would mean days of careful travel through rough country, but there they would find protection among people whom Cyrus Calloway could not intimidate or bribe. As they moved through the night-shadowed forest, the Winchester a constant weight in Grey Wolf's hands, he found himself praying to ancestors he had not addressed in years. The boy beside him had become more than a cause or a responsibility. In the space of 2 weeks, Grey had become family in a way Grey Wolf had thought forever lost to him. That made the rifle in his hands more than mere steel and wood. It became a promise that this fragile new bond would be protected at any cost. The eagle feather seemed to catch fire in the afternoon light as Tall Grass, the tribal elder, held it above Grey's head. Its quill was decorated with intricate beadwork, its veins still perfect despite its age. According to Grey Wolf, it had been presented to Tall Grass's father by Chief Kachisi himself, a symbol of wisdom and clear vision. "The boy has good eyes," Tall Grass observed in Apache, which Grey Wolf quietly translated. "He watches without fear or disgust. Unusual for a white child." They sat before Tall Grass's dwelling on the San Carlos reservation, having arrived at dawn after 2 days of cautious travel through the high country. Their reception had been guarded. The appearance of Grey Wolf after years of absence, accompanied by a white boy, had caused considerable stir among the residents. "He has suffered at the hands of his own kind," Grey Wolf replied in Apache. "As have we all." Tall Grass studied Grey with eyes clouded by cataracts, but sharp with intelligence. "And you bring him here to people who have every reason to reject him." "I bring him to family," Grey Wolf answered simply. The old man nodded slowly, then switched to heavily accented English. "Boy, you understand why my people might not welcome you?" Grey straightened. "Yes, sir. White men took your land, killed your people, broke promises." He hesitated. "Like my father broke promises to me." Tall Grass's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "What do you seek here?" "Safety," Grey answered. "Honestly, until the judge decides." "Ah, white man's law." Tall Grass made a dismissive gesture. "It changes like wind, never in our favor." Grey Wolf leaned forward. "The territorial judge granted me temporary guardianship. The boy's father retaliated. We need shelter until the formal hearing." A murmur ran through the small crowd that had gathered to observe this unusual council. Most of the reservation's residents lived in government-issued canvas tents or crude wooden structures, a far cry from their traditional dwellings. Years of confinement had stripped away much of their traditional way of life, but they maintained their community bonds and governance. "Why should we risk the agent's anger for a white child?" asked a middle-aged woman. "They take our children to their schools. They do not shelter ours." It was a fair question. The Indian agent who oversaw the reservation enforced strict rules. Harboring outsiders without permission could result in ration cuts for the entire community. Before Grey Wolf could respond, "I can leave if I bring trouble," he said, looking around at the gathered faces. "Grey Wolf has taught me enough to survive in the hills for a few days." The quiet dignity of his offer, clearly sincere, despite the fear it must have cost him, changed the mood of the gathering. Several of the older women exchanged glances. "He is thin like our children after the long march," one observed. "And bears the marks of a harsh hand," added another, noting the fading bruises on Grey's face. Tall Grass raised the eagle feather again, this time bringing it slowly down until it touched Grey's shoulder. "The eagle sees all paths," he said. "It flies between the world of spirits and the world of men. It judges by what is, not what should be, or might have been." He handed the feather to Grey, who accepted it with evident surprise. "Among our people," Tall Grass explained, "we do not turn away a child who seeks shelter, even an enemy's child. To do so would dishonor the ancestors who watch over us." He nodded to Grey Wolf. "You and the boy may stay. The agent visits in 3 days. By then we will have decided how to explain his presence." Relief washed over Grey Wolf's face. "Thank you, Uncle." As the council dispersed, a young woman approached with a pot of stew and corn cakes. "You both must be hungry," she said in careful English. "My grandmother says growing boys need food before talk." Grey's stomach growled audibly, bringing a smile to the woman's face. They ate gratefully, the warm food a welcome change from the jerky and berries that had sustained them during their journey. Later, as they settled into the small shelter assigned to them, Grey examined the eagle feather with wonder. "Why did he give me this? I'm not Apache." "It is not about being Apache," Grey Wolf explained. "It is about being seen." Tall Grass recognized something in you worth acknowledging. "Will we be safe here?" Grey asked, glancing toward the reservation's boundaries. "Safer than in the forest." Grey Wolf replied honestly. "The agent may ask questions, but my relatives will help us answer them. And Cyrus would not dare come here with his men. The army would intervene." Grey nodded, placing the feather carefully beside his sleeping mat. "They gave up so much," he said quietly. "Their homes, their way of life. Yet they still offered us shelter. That is the true measure of wealth," Grey Wolf observed. "Not what you have, but what you can afford to share." He adjusted his blanket. "Rest now. Tomorrow you will learn new things, different ways of seeing the world." As twilight settled over the reservation, Grey watched the community preparing for evening. Women gathering at the central well, children being called in from play, elders sitting together in quiet conversation. Despite the poverty evident in their surroundings, there was a strength here, a resilience that transcended material circumstances. For the first time since fleeing the ranch, Gray felt truly beyond Cyrus's reach. Not because of distance, but because he had been accepted into a circle of protection larger than one man could break. The eagle feather caught the last light of day, its golden brown surface seeming to glow from within. Gray touched it gently, a talisman of belonging he had never expected to receive. Outside, someone began to sing, a low, melodic chant that others gradually joined. Grey Wolf closed his eyes, listening with an expression of both pain and homecoming. "What are they singing?" Grey whispered. "A prayer for those who wander," Grey Wolf translated softly, asking the ancestors to guide their return. Grey didn't ask which wanderer the song welcomed home, the Apache who had lived apart for decades, or the white boy who had never belonged anywhere at all. Perhaps, he thought as sleep began to claim him, it was for both of them. The telegram form crackled between Sheriff Miller's fingers as he read it for the third time. The terse message from the U.S. Marshal's office in Prescott had arrived that morning, bringing the first real hope since Gray and Grey Wolf had disappeared 5 days ago. Federal marshals dispatched. Stop arrive Redemption Creek Thursday. Stop evidence of corruption and witness tampering against Calloway being investigated. Stop hold position until arrival. Stop. Miller tucked the telegram into his vest pocket, wincing at the movement. The gash on his temple from the night of the ambush had needed 15 stitches, courtesy of Doc Parker's steady hands. His deputy, young Jim Collins, hovered nearby, concern evident on his face. "You should be resting, Sheriff," Collins said. "That head wound, no time for resting," Miller interrupted, checking his revolver before returning it to its holster. "Need to gather everyone at the town hall. Send word to Martha, the doc, Reverend Abernathy, anyone who'll stand with us when the marshals arrive." "You think they found the boy and the Apache?" Collins asked. Miller shook his head carefully. "No, but my guess is they're safe. Grey Wolf knows this territory better than any man alive. He'll have taken Gray somewhere Cyrus can't reach." The town had transformed in the days since the midnight confrontation on the forest trail. Sides had been chosen, lines drawn. Nearly half the businesses on Main Street had closed their doors after Cyrus called in loans and applied economic pressure. But resistance had grown as well, centered around Martha Henson, who had become an unlikely rallying point. Miller stepped onto the boardwalk, surveying the unusually quiet street. Redemption Creek held its breath, waiting for resolution. At the far end of town, the Broken Spurs foreman, Sam Hollis, dismounted in front of the saloon. His expression was grim as he spotted the sheriff and changed direction to approach him. "Sheriff," Sam greeted him, hat in hand. "Got word you're looking for witnesses against Calloway." Miller studied the weathered cowboy. "That's right. You changing sides, Sam?" "Already changed." Hollis glanced over his shoulder before continuing in a lower voice. "Half the hands have quit. Things have gotten bad up at the ranch. Cyrus is drinking heavy, making threats. Fired 3 men at gunpoint yesterday. Any idea where he is now? That's why I'm here." Hollis leaned closer. "He's gathered about a dozen men, not ranch hands, hired guns from Tucson. They're planning something big. I heard him mention the reservation." Miller felt his blood run cold. "He knows where the boy is." "Seems so. They're heading out at dusk." Hollis twisted his hat in his hands. "There's more, Sheriff. He's got dynamite. Mining charges from the old Reynolds claim. Talking about making an example." "Jesus." Miller straightened, ignoring the pain that shot through his head. "Collins, get a message to Agent Bradley at San Carlos. Warn him Calloway's coming." He turned back to Hollis. "How much time do we have?" "Hours at most. Calloway's men are saddling up now." Miller made a quick decision. "Round up every man you trust. Meet at the livery in 30 minutes. We're riding to the reservation." As Hollis hurried off, Miller headed toward the telegram office to send an urgent message to the approaching marshals. The pieces were falling into place. Cyrus's increasingly erratic behavior, his willingness to defy a judge's order, And now this planned attack on a federal reservation. The man had crossed from manipulative to dangerous. At the town hall an hour later, Miller addressed the hastily assembled group, Martha Henson and a dozen townswomen, Doc Parker, Reverend Abernathy, who had finally found his conscience after witnessing Cyrus threaten a widow who dared speak against him, and about 20 men including shop owners and former broken spur hands. Cyrus Calloway is planning to attack the San Carlos reservation, Miller announced without preamble. He believes Grey Wolf has taken Grey there for protection. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. That's federal land, Doc Parker protested. The army detail at San Carlos is down to 6 men. Miller cut in. They won't stand against Calloway's hired guns. He surveyed the grim faces before him. I've sent warnings, but we need to intercept Calloway before he reaches the reservation. Martha Henson stepped forward. What can we do? Some of us are riding out to stop him. The rest of you need to prepare the town. The marshals arrive tomorrow. They'll need statements, evidence, everything you've seen or heard about Cyrus's treatment of Grey, his business practices, his threat. Reverend Abernathy cleared his throat. I've been complicit in this too long, he admitted. The church records show substantial donations from Calloway following incidents with his son. Payments to ensure my silence, though I didn't see it that way at the time. Miller nodded, respect flickering in his eyes. Write it all down, Reverend, every detail. As the meeting broke up, Martha approached Miller. You think the boy is safe, really safe? Grey Wolf would die before letting harm come to him, Miller replied with certainty. But we need to make sure it doesn't come to that. Outside, 14 mounted men waited, including Sam Hollis and Jim Collins. They were an unlikely palsy shopkeepers alongside cowboys, the blacksmith next to the banker's son, united by the desire to finally stand against the man who had held their town in his grip for too long. Miller swung into the saddle, fighting a wave of dizziness from his injury. Calloway's taking the South Trail, he told them. We'll cut across the high ridge and intercept them at Diablo Pass. As they rode out, Miller felt the weight of the telegram in his pocket. Help was coming, but not soon enough. Today, Redemption Creek would have to save itself, and in doing so perhaps live up to the promise of its name at last. The silver locket caught the fading sunlight as Grey held it open in his palm. Inside, a miniature portrait of his mother gazed back at him, her gentle eyes and slight smile preserved forever behind glass. Beside the tiny painting lay a curl of auburn hair tied with thread, the color still vibrant despite the years since her death. Grey had kept the locket hidden beneath his shirt since fleeing the ranch. Now, as the sounds of approaching horses reached the reservation, he clutched it like a talisman. They are coming, Grey Wolf said quietly, appearing at the entrance of their shelter. Many men, armed. Grey nodded, snapping the locket closed and slipping it back beneath his shirt. The reservation had been preparing since a rider from Redemption Creek arrived, an hour earlier, with Sheriff Miller's warning. Women and children were being moved to the far side of the creek. The few able-bodied men were positioning themselves around the perimeter, armed with whatever weapons they possessed, mostly hunting rifles and bows. Will they attack? Grey asked, following Grey Wolf outside. Your father is not thinking clearly, the Apache replied. Rage has taken his reason. They joined Tallgrass and Agent Bradley, the government representative who oversaw the reservation, at the central meeting area. Bradley, a former cavalry officer with a surprisingly fair-minded approach to his charges, looked grim. This is federal land, he said. Attacking it is a serious crime, but we have only 4 soldiers here. Currently, the others are escorting a supply wagon from Fort Apache. My people will defend their homes, Tallgrass stated flatly. We have done so before, and been massacred for it. Bradley replied, not unkindly. I've sent for reinforcements, but they won't arrive in time. He turned to Grey. Boy, your father is coming for you. If I hand you over peacefully, he might leave without bloodshed. No, Grey Wolf and Tallgrass, simultaneously. Grey straightened his shoulders. "I'll go," he said quietly. "I won't let others die for me." Grey Wolf placed a hand on Grey's shoulder. "It is not your decision to make. The council has spoken. You have been given the eagle feather. You are under our protection now." Before Grey could respond, a scout ran into the clearing. "Riders coming from the north as well," he reported breathlessly. "But not Calloway's men. It's the sheriff and townspeople." Minutes later, Sheriff Miller rode into the reservation, followed by a dozen mounted men. His face was pale beneath his hat, a bandage visible at his temple, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Calloway's about 30 minutes behind us," he announced without preamble. "At least 15 men, heavily armed. They've got dynamite." A murmur of alarm spread through the gathered Apache. "He's gone mad," Agent Bradley muttered. "Not mad," Miller corrected. "Desperate. The territorial marshals are on their way to arrest him. He knows it's his last chance to get the boy." Tall grass gestured toward the hills. "We should scatter. Take the women and children into the high country." "No time," Miller said. "We need to make a stand here." He turned to his men. "Set up positions around the perimeter. Nobody shoots first, but be ready." As the defenders prepared, Grey sought out Grey Wolf. "I need to speak with him," he said urgently. "With Cyrus. Maybe I can stop this." Grey Wolf studied him for a long moment. "It would be dangerous." "More dangerous than a battle here, with children present." Grey gestured around the reservation. "These people took us in. I won't be the cause of their suffering." Grey Wolf finally nodded. "We will speak to him together. In the open ground beyond the creek. Sheriff Miller and his men will cover us." When Cyrus Calloway's party appeared on the ridge overlooking the reservation, they found an unexpected reception. Sheriff Miller, Agent Bradley, and 20 armed men stood in a loose semicircle in the clearing before the first dwellings. Behind them, the reservation's residents waited, tense but dignified. Cyrus reined in his horse, surveying the scene with narrowed eyes. His face was haggard, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. The men flanking him were strangers to Redemption Creek, hard-faced gunmen hired in Tucson. "This is federal land, Calloway," Agent Bradley called out. "Turn around and leave peacefully." Cyrus ignored him, scanning the gathered faces until he spotted Grey, standing beside Grey Wolf. "There's my son," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "I've come to take him home." "The boy stays," Sheriff Miller replied. "Judge Harmon's order stands." "That order was illegally obtained," Cyrus countered. "Based on lies and manipulation by this Apache who's turned my son against me." Grey Wolf stepped forward, Grey beside him. "We will speak with you," the Apache said. "The three of us. In the open ground. No weapons." A tense silence followed. Then Cyrus dismounted, handing his rifle to one of his men. "Keep them covered," he ordered, loud enough to be heard clearly. The three met in the neutral space between the opposing groups. Up close, Grey could see the toll of the past days on his father. The bloodshot eyes, the trembling hands, the desperation poorly disguised as authority. "You're coming home, Grey," Cyrus stated flatly. "This foolishness ends now." "I'm not going back," Grey replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Not to the beatings, not to the tack room, not to being afraid every day of my life. I am your father," Cyrus snarled. "You are my son, my blood." "No," Grey said softly. "I'm not." Cyrus froze, color draining from his face. "Mother told me before she died," Grey continued, "when she knew she wouldn't recover from the fever. She wanted me to understand why you hated me so much." Grey Wolf remained silent, watching this exchange with alert eyes. "She lied," Cyrus hissed, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Grey touched the locket beneath his shirt. "My real father was a cavalry officer stationed at Fort Bowie, Lieutenant James Kendrick. They fell in love while you were away on business. He died in a skirmish with Apache raiders 3 months before I was born." He paused. "Mother said you knew from the beginning that I looked nothing like you, that you reminded her of it every day." Cyrus's facade cracked. "She made a fool of me," he said, his voice breaking. "Everyone knew," one whispered behind my back. "The great Cyrus Calloway." raising another man's bastard. So you punished a child for his mother's choices, Grey Wolf observed, speaking for the first time. You shut your mouth, Indian, Cyrus snapped. This is between me and my aunt and the boy. Why not just send me away? Grey asked, the question that had haunted him for years. Why keep me if you hated me so much? Cyrus laughed bitterly. And confirm the rumors? Let everyone know Catherine had cuckolded me? No. Better to raise you as mine, to shape you into what I needed. An heir who would continue the Calloway name, who would be entirely my creation. Created through pain, Grey Wolf said quietly. Created through discipline, Cyrus corrected. I had to break what was weak in him, what came from his real father. The softness, dreaming, the uselessness. Grey felt a strange calm settle over him. All these years, the abuse had never been about him at all. It had been about Cyrus's wounded pride, his need to control, his rage at a wife who had found love elsewhere. I'm not going back with you, Grey said with finality. Not ever. Cyrus's expression hardened. Then you're as dead to me as your whore mother. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Grey Wolf. You wanted a son, Indian. You got one. A weak-blooded, worthless. A boy of courage and honor, Grey Wolf interrupted, who endured years of your cruelty without becoming cruel himself, who shows kindness despite having received none from you. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Grey and Cyrus. In my tribe, fatherhood is earned, not given by blood. You never earned it. For a moment, it seemed Cyrus might attack with his bare hands. Then the sound of distant hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. A cloud of dust approached from the direction of Redemption Creek riders, moving at speed. Federal marshals, Sheriff Miller called out, It's over, Cyrus. Something broke in Cyrus Calloway then. The last vestiges of his control, his carefully maintained facade, collapsed. He turned to his hired men. Kill them all, he ordered. Burn this place to the ground. Leave no witnesses, but his men hesitated, looking at the approaching dust cloud. I said fire, Cyrus screamed, reaching for a pistol hidden in his coat. Grey Wolf moved with lightning speed, tackling Grey to the ground as Cyrus's shot went wide. Sheriff Miller and his men surged forward. The Apache defenders raised their weapons. For a terrible moment, massacre seemed inevitable. Then Sam Hollis's voice cut through the chaos. Broken spur men, stand down. The foreman bellowed. This ain't what you signed on for. One by one, the ranch hands who had accompanied Cyrus lowered their weapons. The hired gunmen, seeing themselves suddenly outnumbered and facing federal charges, began to back away. Cyrus stood alone, gun dangling from his hand, watching as his power, his control, his very identity dissolved before his eyes. It's finished, Sheriff Miller said, approaching cautiously. Drop the gun, Cyrus. As the marshal's horses thundered into view, Cyrus Calloway, cattle baron, town patriarch, feared and respected pillar of the community, sank to his knees in the dust, a broken man confronting the hollow center of his life. Grey Wolf helped Grey to his feet, one arm protectively around the boy's shoulders. It's over, he said softly. He can't hurt you anymore. Grey touched the locket through his shirt, feeling his mother's portrait against his heart. For the first time in his memory, he stood tall, unafraid, in his father's presence. His real father, the one who had earned the title through protection and care, rather than blood. The adoption papers lay on the judge's desk in the Prescott courthouse, the territorial seal and ribbon giving them an air of solemn authority. Judge Everett, a different man than the one who had granted the temporary custody order, studied the documents with a furrowed brow. This is highly unusual, he remarked, not for the first time during the 3-hour hearing. There is no precedent for a Native American being granted permanent guardianship of a white child in this territory. Grey sat beside Grey Wolf in the front row of the nearly empty courtroom. 6 weeks had passed since the confrontation at the reservation. Cyrus Calloway awaited trial in the territorial prison, charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and corruption. The story had traveled throughout Arizona, becoming something of a sensation in the newspapers. Your Honor, began James Wilson, the lawyer provided by the Territorial Governor's Office. The circumstances here are indeed extraordinary, but so is the relationship between Mr. Grey Wolf and the miner, Gray Calloway. As the testimonials indicate, Miss Grey Wolf has provided exemplary care and guidance during extremely difficult circumstances. Judge Everett nodded absently, turning a page in the file before him. I see statements from Sheriff Miller, Parker, several townspeople of Redemption Creek, and even from Agent Bradley at the San Carlos Reservation. He peered over his spectacles at Gray. Young man, do you wish to live permanently with Mr. Grey Wolf? Gray stood, as Wilson had instructed him. Yes, Your Honor, more than anything. And you understand that you are giving up any claim to the Calloway estate. It appears that despite the revelations about your parentage, Mr. Calloway never legally changed his will. You remain his heir. I understand, sir, Gray replied. I don't want anything from him. The judge studied him for a long moment, then turned to Grey Wolf. And you, sir, you understand the responsibility you're undertaking. This boy will need education, guidance, preparation for life in white society. Grey Wolf rose with quiet dignity. I understand, Judge. Gray will attend school in Redemption Creek. I have arranged with Sheriff Miller and his wife to house him in town during the week. I will continue teaching him the skills a man needs, both those of my people and those he will need in the changing world. Judge Everett shuffled his papers, his decision clearly weighing on him. The courtroom remained silent, save for the ticking of the large clock on the wall. The law, the judge finally said, is meant to serve justice and the welfare of those who cannot protect themselves. In this case, a strict reading of precedent would separate this boy from the only person who has shown him true parental care. He picked up his pen. I will not let legal custom override human decency. With a flourish, he signed the adoption papers. Let the record show that custody of the minor child, Gray Calloway, is hereby granted to, he glanced at the document, the petitioner, known as Grey Wolf. The boy will retain his surname, but is legally and fully under the guardianship of the petitioner until reaching the age of majority. Gray felt a hand on his shoulder, Grey Wolf's gentle squeeze, communicating more than words could express. 2 days later, they returned to Grey Wolf's cabin to find a surprising sight. Where the simple one-room structure had stood, a larger cabin now took its place. The original walls remained, but the dwelling had been expanded, with a new room added to one side and a proper porch wrapping around the front. Welcome home, Sheriff Miller called from where he sat whittling on the porch. Around the clearing, several townspeople, including Martha Henson, Doc Parker, and Sam Hollis, waited with barely contained smiles. While you were in Prescott, Martha explained, stepping forward, we thought your home might need some adjustments for a growing boy. The town took up a collection, Miller added. Seems folks had a change of heart about a lot of things. Gray walked through the new cabin in wonder. The original room remained much as it had been, with Grey Wolf's belongings and medicine. The addition contained a proper bed, a desk beneath a window that faced the sunrise, and shelves already stocked with books, some from the school teacher, others from Reverend Abernathy's personal library. For your drawings and studies, Martha explained, showing him a wooden box containing quality paper, pencils and watercolors. Your mother loved art. She would want you to have these. Outside, Grey Wolf spoke quietly with the sheriff. The town has changed, the Apache observed. Miller nodded. Cyrus held us in a grip of fear and obligation for so long that we forgot who we could be. He gestured toward the cabin. This is a start, a small repayment for what we allowed to happen. That evening, after the visitors had departed, Gray and Grey Wolf sat on their new porch, watching twilight settle over the valley. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Gray's first day at the town school, Grey Wolf's expanded healing practice that now openly served both white and Apache patients. Are you nervous? Grey Wolf asked. About school? Gray considered this. A little, but not afraid. He looked at his guardian. You'll be there to pick me up afterward? Grey Wolf nodded. Every day. They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared overhead. From the forest came the call of an owl, the same one perhaps, that had watched over them during those first uncertain nights together. "I've been thinking about names," Gray said suddenly. "I don't want to be a Calloway anymore." Grey Wolf turned to him. "What name would you choose?" "I thought maybe Kendrick, after my real father." Gray hesitated. "But I never knew him. And a name should reflect who raised you, who taught you to be a man." He looked at Grey Wolf hopefully. Would it be right if I took your family name?" Something shifted in Grey Wolf's normally composed expression, a momentary softening that revealed the depth of emotion beneath his calm exterior. "My family name was lost when the soldiers came," he said quietly. "But we could choose a new one, together." "What was your father's name?" Grey asked. "Before the soldiers, he was called Soaring Hawk." Grey smiled. "Then that's who we are now. The Hawks." As darkness enfolded the valley, father and son sat side by side, their silhouettes merging into one against the backdrop of stars. Behind them, a cabin built by many hands stood ready to shelter them. Before them stretched a future neither could have imagined just months before. And between them, invisible but stronger than any blood tie, the bonds of a family forged not through birth, but through choice, courage, and love.